The last day of death row, inmate David Pittman, evidence, yet death row. Hello friends. Tonight we turn our attention to Florida, where the clock is ticking toward the execution of David Joseph Pittman, scheduled for September 17th, 2025. His case reaches back to the quiet town of Mulberry in night when a fire exposed something far more horrifying than flames. Inside a family home, Clarence and Bonnie Nolles and their 20-year-old daughter Bonnie were found brutally slain. The blaze had been set to cover up the truth, but investigators quickly pointed the finger at Pittman, a young husband in the middle of a divorce and accused of harboring resentment toward his in-laws. For over 3 decades, he has sat on death row, proclaiming his innocence while prosecutors have stood firm on his guilt. Was this a clear-cut case of justice, or one clouded by doubt? Stay with us as we step inside his final 24 hours. And don't forget to subscribe to Deathwatch Diaries for more prison documentary stories. In the early morning hours of May 15th, 1990, Mulberry residents awoke to the sound of sirens. At around 3:30 in the morning, firefighters were called to a blaze at the Nolles family home. The structure was already engulfed, flames leaping high into the dark sky, smoke visible for miles. Neighbors later recalled hearing explosions from inside, caused by accelerants spread throughout the house. When the fire was finally contained, firefighters made a chilling discovery. Inside, they found 3 bodies. Clarence, 61, Barbara, 51, and their 20-year-old daughter, Bonnie. But what first looked like fire victims turned out to be something far worse. Each of them had been stabbed repeatedly before the fire was set. The flames were not the cause of death, they were meant to erase the evidence. For Mulberry, a quiet town 35 miles east of Tampa, this was unthinkable. Families who had always left doors unlocked now lived in fear, wondering who could have carried out such a crime. To understand what happened, we must look at the Nolles family and their connection to David Pittman. Clarence and Barbara had 2 daughters, Marie and Bonnie. Marie, the older, was 23 in 1990, married to 28-year-old David Pittman. Together, they had 3 young children, but by that spring, their marriage had collapsed. Marie wanted a divorce, and the split was bitter. Adding to the tension, Bonnie, Marie's younger sister, had recently accused David Pittman of attempting to assault her 5 years earlier, when she was just 15. It was a revelation that fueled Pittman's anger, especially as divorce proceedings loomed. Family members later told investigators that David had made threats. He spoke of harming his in-laws, and he harbored particular rage toward Bonnie. When the murders happened just weeks later, suspicion quickly turned toward him. Investigators pieced together what happened after the fire. They learned that Pittman had been seen driving a homemade wrecker, a makeshift tow truck he often used. Hours after the fire, a construction worker saw someone with that same wrecker trying to pull a car. Later identified as Bonnie's Toyota out of a ditch, half a mile from the Nolles home. Another witness, living near the site, reported seeing a man set the car on fire before running away. When police showed him a photo lineup, he pointed directly at David Pittman. These testimonies, along with Pittman's known anger toward the family, began forming the backbone of the prosecution's case. But the state would later lean on something else, words allegedly spoken inside a jail cell. While awaiting trial, Pittman shared a cell with another inmate. That inmate later told authorities that Pittman confessed to the murders. According to him, Pittman said he had gone to the Nolles home that night, intending to be intimate with Bonnie against her will. When she resisted, he stabbed her in the hallway. He then turned the knife on Clarence and Barbara before setting the house ablaze to destroy evidence. The confession was damning, but it came from a jailhouse informant, the kind of testimony that has often been criticized for being unreliable. Even then, the story painted Pittman as someone driven by rage, resentment, and twisted desire. In the courtroom, the case against Pittman looked strong on the surface. Witnesses placed him near the crime scene. He had made threats against the victims, and the jailhouse confession sealed a narrative of premeditation and brutality. But when defense attorneys cross-examined the evidence, cracks began to show. No fingerprints linked Pittman to the Nolles home. None of his prints were found on Bonnie's burned Toyota. His clothes bore no trace of blood or burns. And the supposed murder weapon was never recovered. Family members testified that Pittman had been with them much of that day and night. To them, the state's story was stitched together from assumptions and questionable witnesses. Still, the jury was unmoved. After a trial that gripped Polk County, they convicted Pittman of 3 counts of first-degree murder, along with arson and auto theft. The sentence was death. Since 1990, Pittman has lived under the shadow of execution at Florida State Prison. He has spent more than 3 decades in a cell, watching fellow inmates walk their own final miles. Over the years, he continued to proclaim his innocence. In one interview with the Tampa Bay Times shortly after his arrest, he said bluntly, "They got the wrong person in jail. I had nothing to do with it. They got no murder weapon, no motive, no nothing." Supporters of Pittman point to the lack of physical evidence. They argue that the entire case rested on circumstantial details, eyewitnesses in the dark, and the words of a jailhouse informant desperate to cut a deal. To them, the trial was less about facts and more about finding anyone to blame. But to the Nolles family, the conviction brought closure. For them, the evidence was clear. Pittman had motive, opportunity, and the anger that drove him to kill. Now, in 2025, the case has reached its final chapter. On September 17th, David Pittman is scheduled to die by lethal injection. His execution will mark one of the longest-running death penalty cases in Florida's history, ending after 35 years of appeals and challenges. Inside the prison, Pittman faces his last days like so many before him, alone in a cell, with a clock that no longer counts years or months, but hours. He will be allowed a final meal, though whether he accepts it remains to be seen. He will be given the chance for last words, perhaps another denial, perhaps silence. Outside the prison walls, the debate still rages. Was this justice, or was it a miscarriage of justice carried out under the weight of grief, anger, and circumstantial proof for Mulberry? The scars of that night in 1990 never healed. The original Nolles home was destroyed by fire, replaced by a new house 2 years later. But for those who lived through it, the memories remain. Clarence and Barbara lost their lives. Bonnie lost her future. And Marie lost her parents and sister in one single night. Their deaths, and the trial that followed, still echo in Polk County, serving as a reminder of how fragile justice can feel as the final hours close in on David Pittman. The weight of this case continues to stir both certainty and doubt. On one side, prosecutors, witnesses, and the surviving Nolles family members believe the evidence speaks for itself, a bitter husband who carried out a brutal act of vengeance. On the other side, supporters point to the lack of physical proof, the reliance on circumstantial testimony, and the haunting possibility of a wrongful conviction. What cannot be denied is the devastation left behind. 3 lives, Clarence, Barbara, and Bonnie Nolles, were taken in one night of terror, leaving behind grief that has echoed for 30 years. On September 17th, Florida will carry out the sentence, closing a chapter but leaving lingering questions. Was justice done, or will history remember this case as another controversy in the death penalty debate? Thank you for watching, and please subscribe to Deathwatch Diaries for more prison documentary stories.